a hollyhock that once belonged to Stanley Kunitz. Later that week, I found it in my right side pocket. It had begun to bloom, blue, tissue thin. To the bottle of carbolic acid went your father. To brain plaque, the weed of forgetfulness, went your mother. Still you felt a fondness for the natural thing. You loved even the mulch and the flower of the mallow family, hollyhock. Come in, you said. From one specimen of the garden, you cut me a sprig, which I pocketed, taken from light, from you, from its princedom, a small Gautama. Then I forgot it was there, down there in the dark, doing its precise work anyway. So let's get back into comfortable seat, feet on the floor. Hands on your lap, whether facing up or down. Shoulders relaxed. And then, as I always say, lengthening the neck just a little bit by a millimeter, 2 millimeters, so that it might be only noticeable to you. Then down the center, starting in the forehead, feeling presence there, feeling awareness there. Letting the face relax, the muscles of the jaw, around the eyes, the tongue just rested at the top palate of the mouth. And then undoing the armor, opening the chest, creaking open the cathedral door of the heart. Walking into that spacious quality that's suddenly there and you didn't know it. Softening the belly, feeling that release. What is working on you even as you're working on it? What is working on you, even as you're working on it? Deepening the breath to 3 counts in and 4 counts out. And then deeper, just by a second. Take the count to 4. See if you can make the exhale last to 5 counts. Staying with that question, what seems to be working on you, even as you're working on it? As you come back to 3 counts in, 4 counts out. Resting in that cathedral space you've rediscovered in yourself. A hollyhock that once belonged to Stanley Kunitz. Later that week, I found it in my right side pocket. It had begun to bloom, blue, tissue thin. To the bottle of carbolic acid went your father. To brain plaque, the weed of forgetfulness, went your mother. Still you felt a fondness for the natural thing. You loved even the mulch and the flower of the mallow family, hollyhock. Come in, you said. From one specimen of the garden, You cut me a sprig, which I pocketed, taken from light, from you, from its princedom, a small Gautama. Then I forgot it was there, down there in the dark, doing its precise work anyway. This poem is about a hollyhock that bloomed on its own in my pocket. And I'm comparing it at the end to the Buddha just before the Buddha's awakening. And it's a significant poem for me this week because it takes place in Provincetown during my first visit to Mary Oliver's house. This is a story that I told, I think, a year ago in this room. But I had been going to Provincetown for 17 years now to visit my friends Amy and Kermit, who Kermit was a professor at American University and retired in 2007. And they are my great friends. Kermit passed away this week. So I'm just coming back from a very moving week in Provincetown that brought me back again to the memories of the very first visits. So while I was there the first time, Mary Oliver, who had been a friend for 6 or 7 years already, invited me to her house for the first time and gave me loose directions, which I managed to misplace. So I was driving up to Provincetown with the idea that she was at a certain house number in my head, and I had gotten the house number completely reversed and landed on the wrong side of Commercial Street and walked confidently up to the door and knocked, and someone answered, and I said, "Is this Mary Oliver's house?" And the person at the door said, "No, this is Stanley Kunitz's house." And it was a complete accident that I had found another great poet of Provincetown and was suddenly invited in. Kunitz had just died the year before, and these were helpers and family members who were breaking down the house and getting it ready for sale. But Stanley Kunitz was a master gardener and well known for his gardening and the way that he talked about gardening and poetry, similar, I guess, to what I'm trying to do with the Buddhist teachings and poetry. The caretaker invited me into the garden, and there we stood among this lush richness in the middle of Provincetown, busy Provincetown, buzzing Provincetown. There was this quiet, heart-like cathedral that I had just entered, and in my memory at least, it was silent, it was open, it was Kashanti, it was ocean-like space. And she offered me a sprig from a hollyhock, and she told me right there that this was Stanley's favorite flower. And I found out later that that was true. So in the poem that I wrote in response to that experience, Stanley Kunitz himself is offering me the sprig of the hollyhock because it did feel like it came from him somehow, that this whole set of circumstances, as odd and coincidental as it was, had landed in my lap without my even trying. In the poem, I put the hollyhock in my pocket, and it sits there, and I forget about it. And in the darkness, it blooms anyway. So it's really a poem about the comic nature of life. How no matter how hard we try to screw things up, it sometimes turns out all right anyway. And it's a poem about blossoms, which were the subject of one of the talks last week. And in that talk, I used a line from Yogananda, from Autobiography of a Yogi. Yogananda says, "The blossom falls away when the fruit appears." And I think that reading poetry for years and years and years has taught me the awesome truth of that statement. Because at the beginning of my poetic career, I was very quickly enamored by poems that crackled like fireworks. They told me things. They confessed things. They were edgy. They were disturbing. And those were the poems that I thought were the great ones because they created this fountain of emotion in me. But in fact, it was the quieter poems that had the long-term effect for me. Those poems that crackled like fireworks were the blossom poems. The blossoms fell away and they were gone. But the poems that stayed with me were the ones that had that, they had that edginess sometimes on the surface, but there was something else there that was waiting to come forth. And those are the poets for which the fruit appeared. And I forgot about all the things that drew me in at first to say Keats, all of the language, all the flavors of his poems, but it's really the teachings of his poems that appeared like fruit after all of that became part of the known landscape. All of the early romance, of each of those poets fades away, and like a marriage, something else appears that is sustenance, that is more nourishing than the original fantasy. And in this poem, I think what's happening too is that this Buddha nature that's emerging at the end metaphorically is something that I've struggled with for a long time, because even as a poet, I've wanted to wrestle the poem into submission. I've wanted this poem to sit and be quiet and let me do what I want to do. But all the while, the poem was working on me as I was working on it. I was busy making fancy blossoms, and this poem in the deep pockets of my unconscious was busy building the fruit. So here's Hollyhock that once belonged to Stanley Kunitz. Later that week, I found it in my right side pocket. It had begun to bloom, blue, tissue thin. To the bottle of carbolic acid went your father. To brain plaque, the weed of forgetfulness, went your mother. Still you felt a fondness for the natural thing. You loved even the mulch and the flower of the mallow family, hollyhock. Come in, you said. From one specimen of the garden, you cut me a sprig, which I pocketed. Taken from light, from you, from its princedom, a small Gautama. Then I forgot it was there, down there in the dark, doing its precise work anyway. So let's just sit for another 10 minutes and then open it up to a discussion that goes for another half an hour or less, depending on how long you'd like to hang out and talk. But getting back into that space. And really making an intention to dig deep into the pockets of the unconscious and inquire, just to inquire. What in my life has been working on me all the while I've been working on it? Feeling that awareness in your forehead again, relaxing the muscles of the face. Letting go of everything you can let go. Staying with that cathedral space in the heart, or if the image of Stanley Kunitz's garden was more effective. Feeling the oceanless or the ocean-like, measureless space that's always around, that's always inside. Four counts in. Five counts out. If your thoughts are racing, or you're thinking about somewhere you should be, just step back from it, pull back from it, as if gently tearing away the Velcro of attachment and identification with those thoughts and emotions. What if they were not you? And you just watch them like a movie. And if you can do that, that's the point of the meditation. Imagine living like this. This must be the experience Rilke had, looking at the archaic torso of Apollo and seeing every part of it looking back at him. For there's no place that doesn't see you. You must change your life. Straightening the back just a little bit, keeping the shoulders soft, going back to lengthening the neck just by a few millimeters. Softening the muscles of the jaw. This is what it's like to sink into the deep pocket where life is doing all the work. The life of the Buddha is one of joy, peace, and freedom, not afraid of or attached to anything. It just opens when it opens. A hollyhock that once belonged to Stanley Kunitz. Later that week, I found it in my right side pocket. It had begun to bloom, blue, tissue thin. To the bottle of carbolic acid went your father. To brain plaque, the weed of forgetfulness, went your mother. Still you felt a fondness for the natural thing. You loved even the mulch and the flower of the mallow family, hollyhock. Come in, you said. From one specimen of the garden, you cut me a sprig, which I pocketed. Taken from light, from you, from its princedom, a small Gautama. Then I forgot it was there, down there in the dark, doing its precise work anyway.